Hi, everybody. It's Mr. Stanley here, and I am here to give you the next part of Hudson Past. And this is actually a new part. Sorry for the old slide there. This is a new part, and we're going into a new era. So let me show you this timeline. So here's the timeline of David Hudson's era. Let me get rid of that for you. So, as you can see here, David Hudson's era, or the time in which he lived, there was great change and great opportunity in the birth of our nation. As you can see, we have declared independence from England. And around that time, David Hudson decided to move to or purchase that Range 10 Town Fort, which was up way up here. And as he purchased that land and moved, and we talked about his journey, his couple of journeys with his family and his friends and his business partners, and they started to develop a village, a town, a settlement. And that happened right about in here is when David Hudson moved in. And then they actually didn't establish the village with the city council and mayor until quite some time later. But that was after the town grew, and it grew for several different reasons. Number one, Mr. Hudson really wanted to have, he brought with him from Goshen, Connecticut, values and things that he thought would make a very successful town like Goshen, Connecticut. So he knew that he needed certain things. And certain things that he needed to have good schooling for people and for kids. So that's when he established Western Reserve College at the time, which was for obviously older students. But he did want to establish a very good system of schools for learning for all ages. David Hudson also believed in freedom of religion. So he wanted to make sure that his town had many churches, like the First Congregational Church, which he first headed up and founded. He also wanted to bring with him a little taste of home. And most of the buildings that he brought with him had the style of the federal architectural style, which had the houses with the classic windows and the shutters on the sides, usually white and black shutters, but then they could vary in red and black. And this is kind of what the style was at the time that he wanted to bring. He also wanted to bring, and I'll go back to this one picture again here for you. Where is it? He also wanted to bring the idea of a place for people to gather. Originally, the green was meant more for grazing animals, but over time it became more of a place to gather for celebrations, parties, 4th of July celebrations, and then over time it simply became just that. Places for us to have things like Taste of Hudson Farmers Market, which still we value today. So even hundreds of years ago, David Hudson envisioned our town being a very tight, proud community that has value in religion and schools and faith and in progress. So David Hudson had a vision almost 200 years ago to do that. So he brought with him that culture and that style. And over time, Hudson started to grow. And I mentioned to you in the last video that it grew because of this thing called the Erie Canal. And there are systems here of this canal. They were built by hand. Gentlemen came over. If you have German or Irish roots, there's a possibility that you might have ancestors that came over from Ireland looking for work to avoid what was known as the Great Potato Famine, and it was killing hundreds of thousands of Irish people. And what they did was they decided to move, and they got on boats and came across the Atlantic in seek of work. And they promised them good wages to come and do back-breaking work and dig a ditch for water to pour in so that they could have that canal system, which I showed most of you in the video yesterday of these canal boats. And they were a much faster way to transport goods and people from place to place. And that really helped Hudson grow. Here's Peninsula. We're very close to that. We were able to transport goods, people, services, doctors, lawyers, educators from all over the country to come to Hudson. And it grew. And Hudson went into huge boom. And people started coming here, not only just working and living, working here, but they also lived here and spent their money here, which was a reason for it to grow. And it continued to grow. And as it continued to grow, this canal actually started to fail. And the reason why it started to fail is because there was a new mode of transportation that was becoming very, very important to the growth of our nation, which is the railroad. So Hudson had a railroad station that stopped through. This is actually a picture of the railroad station. I could Google map for you and show it, but it's kind of over near, kind of over behind Chipotle, is where this train station was back in the mid to late 1800s, around this time, around the time after the David Hudson dies. So his era starts to fade away, and because the canal started to fail, this could bring more goods and services. So the train actually really made things boom. And speaking of railroad, Hudson also, as I had mentioned, David Hudson wanted to bring values of faith and education, but he also brought values of equality. Whereas many townspeople in Hudson believed that slavery was not something that we needed to move forward with, and people were all created equal. So we're going to take a look at a new era, and that is called the James Ellsworth era. And as you can see, they kind of blend together. So we have an 1850 here, and around the time that David Hudson dies, James Ellsworth is a young man around that time, and he experiences all of these events. So the railroad comes through Hudson, really made Hudson kind of a really big deal at that time. And but around that time, though, we have something called the Civil War, which was fought over slavery. So there were people in Hudson, and one of the most famous ones is Owen Brown, and his brother John was very important in actually getting the Civil War started. They were something called abolitionists, and those guys believed in abolishing or abandoning slavery altogether. So those two gentlemen, as a funny story is that his brother actually in Southern Ohio what actually attacked a Confederate army that was kind of trying to get things started with the Civil War and overtake the president and overtaking the United States at the time so that they could create their own country where they could have slavery. But Owen, his brother John, actually bombed their provisions and their fort, and that kind of got the Civil War started. So Hudson has a really unique connection that way. They also have another connection. Speaking of railroads, it's a different kind of railroad. It's called the Underground Railroad, and you're probably familiar with the Underground Railroad. It has nothing to do with the steam engine and nothing to do with trains. The reason it was called the Underground Railroad is because famous Americans like Harriet Tubman, she would lead freed slaves or slaves that escaped on trying to get to Canada. In Hudson, kind of the houses in town would have basements and cellars and attics that would host and hide these slaves that were trying to get to Canada. And the last stop was Cleveland. There's actually some plaques near where I live. If you don't know, I do live up closer to Cleveland. And there is a plaque right here on the water. It was the last stop, and those slaves would get on boats and literally row through the night and hide away from slave owners to get to Canada, because in Canada, slavery was against the law. And that's why we fought the Civil War. So at that time, there was a lot of boom, and Hudson was a very important place. It was actually on its way to becoming as big as a Cleveland or an Akron. But there were certain things that happened. And what happened is the failure. And I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. The railroad actually began to fail right after the Civil War. The Civil War actually helped, or the railroads actually helped the Civil War, the United States or the Union Army win the Civil War, because they could move troops faster and move ammunition faster. But the Confederate Southern states, they did not have a good as railroad system as the Northern states did. And that's pretty much what won the war, to be honest. And then after after a while, they realized, or the United States, they realized how really great and how beneficial railroads were. And everybody wanted the game. So people started investing their money in railroads. They wanted to buy the lines. They wanted to invest in engineers and ship all their goods. And so many people got in the game, they did what was called, they flooded the market. And at that time, the railroads, they stopped. These railroad companies were bought up by billionaires and millionaires at the time, and they started shutting down all the smaller railroads, which would have been the one that came through Hudson. And those railroads and people and goods and services stopped coming through Hudson. So some of the railroads failed, and Hudson stopped growing at that time. And because people and goods and services and jobs and people are coming to visit, things started to fall into hard times a little bit in Hudson, which was around this time shortly after the Civil War, about 15 to 20 years after the Civil War. And since things got so bad, Western Reserve started to move, and things in Western Reserve College became defunct. It actually moved. They moved to Cleveland and became Western Reserve College, which still exists today. So the buildings started to fall apart. Windows were broken. Things were just not looking well. And to add insult to injury, in 1892, there was a great fire in Hudson, and it burnt down a lot of Main Street. I'll have to show this to you outside of the video because I'm not prepared to show you where it started. But I'll tell you the fire story separately on another day. But the fire actually burnt down most of Main Street. So here we are. We're in a really bad time in Hudson. People aren't coming in. Half of Main Street's burnt down. The college has moved. So things are not looking good. Things are bad. The railroads aren't coming through. And along comes a man by the name of James Ellsworth. And James Ellsworth, as I mentioned before, he kind of saves Hudson. His dad actually, he grew up in Hudson, and he owned, let me see if I can find this. His dad owned a general store. Where are you, general store? Oh, there you are. His dad owned a general store here in Hudson, and he grew up in that general store right above it. And as time went on, he became very successful and in the railroads, obviously, and moved to Chicago, but never forgot where he came from, and decided that he noticed how poorly Hudson had suffered over his young years, and decided to give back. So he started giving and donating his money to help Hudson rebuild. And he single-handedly almost rebuilt Main Street with his money. And in his time, he donated the money to build what is now the clock tower, and help rebuild after the fire. And he also came to help out with the rebuilding of Western Reserve. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the fire and how important James Ellsworth came to be in the story, and how Hudson kind of ended up. It started out as a Cleveland. It was going to end up another Cleveland, and then it got back into good times again. And then things started to flatten out for Hudson. It didn't grow like it should have. And it really started and ended with James Ellsworth. So just thought I would stop right there, and we'll do the last part, I guess, of Hudson's past tomorrow. And then obviously our field trip's on Thursday. So enjoy. And if you have any questions or comments, or you'd like to know anything, we'll do the fire and the rest of Hudson past tomorrow. All right, enjoy.